A myth that people believe is if I make time for the soft stuff of the empathy and listening and communicating, that is going to cost me the hard results. It's actually the opposite. Right now, employee engagement is super, super low. 62% of employees are disengaged. That is actually costing us $8.8 trillion globally in lost productivity. What if you were able to just shift a little bit within the way you lead or the way you incentivize your teams and actually cost?
Still trying to climb the corporate ladder, even though it's clearly on fire? Today's guest, Jennie Blumenthal, helps leaders trade burnout for breakthrough performance. After 20 years in the executive fast lane, she slammed the brakes, rewrote the rules, and built a playbook for thriving in the future of work. On today's episode of the Executive Connect podcast, we dive into the rise of hustle culture, how to ditch it without ditching success, and what true leadership looks like in the world that's finally waking up. Welcome, Jennie.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm so excited to be here today and to speak with you. So thanks for having me.
Your path from leading corporate transformations to founding two businesses is truly inspirational. What pushed you to take the leap, and how did these experiences reshape how you see leaders today?
Yes. Okay. So my story really starts with how I learned the value of hard work, which was I was raised by two teachers on a Christmas tree farm. And so I think I was probably an entrepreneur from the start, but really learned the value of a good day's work and taking care of the land and all that fun stuff. And so when I launched into the real world, my sister and I both were trying to figure out how to navigate our careers without much of a roadmap beyond what our parents, had been able to navigate within the education space. I wound up going into consulting. She wound up going into law. And so I dutifully climbed that corporate ladder and just put my head down and hustled harder. And ultimately what that meant was a lot of success in one dimension of my life. I wound up becoming a partner with PwC, a global management consulting firm, and leading a $200 million business unit of 300 people all over the world, doing growth strategy and digital transformations. And for the most part, I loved it. I really was enjoying being with my clients and coaching people and working through workshops. But as I climbed higher and higher on that ladder, I began to feel this gnawing emptiness in the pit of my stomach that maybe the next level would be the thing that actually unlocks the 25th hour of the day. Or maybe if I can just put my head down and hustle even harder, I'll get to this place where I feel peace, or I feel like it's enough, or I've arrived. And it really wasn't working for me, but I didn't have another playbook. I didn't really know what to do that would be any different. And so I got on those 2 to 3 planes a week, and I, tried to schedule those, all my flights around bedtimes and get back in time to put my 3rd and 5th grader to bed and sing a bedtime story and then log on for one last email. Any working parent can probably relate to the shuffle that is working while parenting. And so I felt like there was another way, but I just couldn't see it. I couldn't figure out how else I could really become this version of myself and really hit these high performance standards I held for myself. I knew what I was capable of, but also meld it in with this life that I wanted for the rest of the dimensions in my world. And so in my story, the pandemic hit. I live in the mid-Atlantic in DC. And so in our world, the schools were shut down for a time. And we at first, were trying to figure out what to do next. But soon we all got a chance to, rediscover each other in our own house. So we were doing puzzles and walks and playing tennis and all the things you can't do when you're on 3 flights a week. And I thought, maybe this is it. I figured it out. I'm running this huge practice and I'm on this huge upward trajectory to get the next big role. And I get this time with my kids. Like, this is it. And that whole facade came crashing down one night when my then 10-year-old delivered dinner to me after a particularly long day. And I said, buddy, I know this has been so hard on everyone, but I'm also just really happy we've had all this time together. And he looked at me and delivered this cheerful news that only your own child can tell you that's the truth you need to hear. And he said, yeah, Mom, it's been great. I mean, you've been working like all day, every day, but at least I get to see you on some of the weekends. And that kind of broke something inside of me. And I think it was just this facade of I'm trying to be happy. I'm not actually happy. And that kind of gave me the inspiration to say, what other ways could I lead myself? How could I do this differently? And I'm a consultant. I've been one for 20 years working in Fortune 500. So I said, I've got to figure out the root cause of this. And did I cause this, or was it the situation I was in? And that really threw me into learning and unlearning what I thought leadership was, and picking up all of these books of Brené Brown and Simon Sinek and all of these other leaders that I had never had time for when I was just trying to skim the Wall Street Journal. And that really got to this place where I started sharing my story. I had other people share theirs, and that became my first book, Corporate Rehab, Ditch the Hustle Culture and Thrive Again. And it really was a journal to myself from 10 years before of what I would have done differently, or any of the thousands of guys I coached through the partnership path of, hey, I wish someone had pulled me aside and said, here's different ways to lead yourself, or here's a process to go through to kind of recognize when hustle culture is running the show, or when you're making aligned decisions. And that's kind of reframed the way I think about leadership. I think we all need to do some corporate rehab and just rehab what we think of as leadership, because we just usually lead the way that we were led, and there's room to really improve on that.
Money Ripples is on a mission to help professionals like you get their money working harder. Their clients free up an average of $35,000 their first year without having to work extra hours. To show you how, they've put together a powerful training called Cash Flow Secrets. And as a listener of the Executive Connect podcast, you can get it completely free. Just visit moneyripples.com/secrets and enter the promo code EXEC. Yeah, I love that. I think so many good things in there, but the corporate rehab really hit a nerve for me as a fellow hustler and traveling mom. It really hit me head on when I started reading this book. And so can you walk our listeners through that rehab process, what it looked like for you from kind of stuck to hustle mindset? So I think a lot of times people think it's just like this switch that we're going to be so used to this hustle, and then we're going to flip the switch and we're just going to go back to the not hustle. But the in between, I guess is what I'll call it. It takes time and kind of retraining. I'll think of it kind of like, training for the Olympics. It's just, you can't just unwind it. So maybe you can walk us through that rehab process a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I'm actually glad you asked this too, in the way you did, because it bears repeating that both of us are hustlers. We're all hustlers, right? And whether you're hustling to get that next, goal in and close the contract, or you're hustling to get your kid or your dog out the door on time, there is a time and a place for hustling. And I believe in hard work, and I believe in hustling. The distinction I make in the book is it's different from hustle culture, when we're on all the time and grinding is the only way through, and you're sleeping on the floor and it's 24/7 and it's 100 miles an hour all the time. There's no breaks. And the reason we make that distinction is because we all need to hustle and then rest. Get the project in and then take a break and before we try to deliver. And that's because there are different processes within our brains and our bodies. And so just like you were saying, for an Olympic sport, Olympic athletes do not train 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There is active recovery days. There are specific things that they do where they're cross-training. And that's because they are treating their muscles just the way we should treat our brain, where there's different parts of our bodies that need to be firing or resting at different times to get optimal performance. And if any of us are athletes, our whole family is athletes, so I can always relate to this. Who of us didn't think, where they were trying to train for a marathon and the guidance is, well, run 2 minutes and walk a minute. And you think, no, I got to go even faster. But darn if that's not true, that when you build in that rest time or that recovery into a training process, you're always going to get your better PR. And it's no different when we think about work. So with that in mind, I started to go about what's the way that if I were to counsel or coach the either 10 or 5-year version of myself from 5 or 10 years ago, how would I approach that, and how would I think about doing it differently instead of just staying stuck and in the choices I made or what could have been different. And so I really pulled that together from everything I read. It's about 50 books, 100 podcasts, and tried to distill that into something that would be easy for people to actually pick up and not so, not too taxing. And so that's really where the name Corporate Rehab came from. I joked that I was detoxing from hustle culture, but rehab actually is a framework, and it stands for R, which is recognize the context of your values and your decisions. E is evaluate some of the mindsets and patterns that you might be just doing on autopilot and you've never kind of questioned. H is heal. I found as I started to do a lot of my interviews that about 90% of the people I started asking about their experiences with hustle culture had some sort of physical representation of the stress and didn't even put the two things together. In fact, one woman I interviewed said, I knew I had stress at work, but I didn't think that much of it until I realized I was throwing up every morning, but only between Monday and Friday, never on the weekends. But it took her a while to realize that was connected to what she was doing Monday through Friday. So there's a lot of healing ways we can kind of step out of the stress that we're exposed to on a daily basis. A in the framework is arise and reconnect to the strengths and the things that actually made you excited about your job in the first place. And then B stands for building new dimensions of your life and work that work better for you. So that's really what the rehab framework is. I've got, keynotes and coaching pieces that kind of go walk people through that. But the book is a really nice way to just kind of pick it up on an airplane and, I call it a buffet, look at all of the different exercises and different ways that you can kind of do pieces of the framework and do what works for you.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'll tell you a little secret. When we met in Manhattan, I read the whole book in a sitting. Like, I just couldn't put it down. But I think there's so many things I want to unpack here, because I think one thing you said that we don't realize until we step back and ask our body or ourselves, like, what's going on? How is this correlated to that? And it does take that step back. And I would say, I have for myself mastered that hustle at work and hustle for my health. Like, I'm hustling across all the things, but I'm very mindful that weeks are going to be busy, but I have to schedule it. Like, for me, I know that I'll just blaze through and power through and, early to the plane and back home Friday and, and blaze through and hustle through. But I do think having these checks and balances and processes that you're talking about is so key, because without the processes, we just continue to hustle. It's like, when I get in the shower, I don't think about, shampooing my hair and then conditioning my hair. It's robotic. It's programmed within me. And it's the same with this hustle culture. It's programmed. We've been trained. We're Olympic athletes. We're corporate Olympic athletes. But I want to unpack that a little bit, because I do think, I've had some of those aha moments where I'm like, oh, wow. I thought I had it all together. And then things pop up with my health the older I get. And so I want to just kind of get some maybe insights on that, because I do think the hustle is equally important. Wealth and wellness go together. You're growing your career, building wealth, but the wellness has to be something that's programmed in, processed in. And so I want to get kind of your thoughts on that part of it.
Well, the way I think about the heal, and when I go into that piece in that chapter, it's really across mind, body, and spirit, because all of these work together, so seamlessly in our bodies. I like to think of it as like our bodies are these supercomputers, right? And you can't isolate the hardware from the software. Maybe at the purchasing time, sure, but it becomes real hard to show like where those two things, don't interact as you go through it. And our bodies kind of work the same way. Thought comes into our minds, and we have a feeling that comes up, and we react to it before we're even aware of it. And if you actually slow down, you can start to intercept those different patterns. But I like to think of that as something where sometimes it's just catching ourselves in a mindset that no longer serves us. Maybe we come from a place of we've got to hustle to make sure we have enough on the table, or we've got to hustle because we want to prove to ourselves we can do it. We can get to that next level, or whatever it might be. And that gets us to a great place. But sometimes, a strength overused can become that weakness. And so it's just a matter of trying to catch ourselves when we're in that thinking. I often, hear a lot from my clients that it's, they'll go into a presentation and suddenly they might as well be 4 years old in that presentation. If the client starts yelling, they're shrinking or they're yelling back, and all of a sudden they kind of just go right back to a situation that, they're not actually in, but their body thinks they are. So we joke about it that, you can tell yourself the boss is actually not a bear that's chasing you. It's not your dad, it's really just somebody who's having their own emotional reaction. You can choose what kind of reaction you want to have in that moment. But even just that thought of being able to choose, it can be really empowering to kind of heal that mindset. And really what you're doing, and this is where I could geek out if we had more time, if you actually Google it, there's pictures of like an actual nerve synapse firing. And what happens is we're rewiring our brains when we're actually choosing that new thought. The way I describe it to my kids is picture it like a ski slope, and your mind is going to go down those well-worn tracks in the snow if you don't give it another track to go down. If you're just heading downhill, your skis will find that groove, right? But if you cut a new path, then you give yourself a chance to go down that. And that's really what we're doing, which to me feels super hopeful. A lot of the neuroscience and research on that is relatively new, only in the last 10 years. So it's kind of exciting that we can choose and rewind or rewire some of that. All of the spirit pieces really kind of relate to the body as well, but a lot of that gets into whether you have a faith practice, whether it's things that are connecting you to something bigger than yourself. So sometimes I relate it to just purpose, knowing that there's a reason that you're doing this job, or connecting to what are the things that you get out of it that feel really purposeful to you. And when we're in a not so great place, it could just be is there a moment in your day that actually brought you some energy? And that's enough. Just focusing on that instead of feeling kind of lost in, the shuffle of all of the emails and everything else that are coming through is kind of enough to kind of anchor us in some sort of purpose. And then the final piece is body. So if we think about our bodies as the supercomputer, they're hosting all of this, all these emotions, all these signals, and, emotions are just energy in motion. So it's literally, trapped energy within yourself, if you want to kind of think of it from a Reiki perspective, or I like to think of it, I always go back to the factual because it's helpful to meet people there. Our guts have about half the amount of neurons that our brains do. So when we say my gut felt off, or I just trust my gut, there's a reason for that, because there's actually just as many, or half those, just almost as many of those neurons in our gut, which means that our bodies are super connected all the way through. That's why a lot of people have theories that, when we have poor indigestion or digestion issues, a lot of times there's something else going on where there's stress in our bodies. So anything you can do to get back in your body and not leave it at that time, meaning doing breath work or just putting your hand on your heart or something where you can just kind of make sure that you're grounding yourself. One I really like to do for my clients who are in a board meeting when this happens is kind of put your hands together. If you can see me, or otherwise if you're driving, I'm just touching my fingertips to each other. Just do something like that to kind of activate yourself and kind of make sure that you're checking in with your body instead of letting your mind race away with the thoughts, whatever you're having of, oh, I'm going to fail this presentation, or they're never going to hire me, or whatever else it is. Just try to get back in your body by, making sure that you can kind of feel it.
This episode's sponsor is a couple I absolutely love, David and Alexis Kiwi. They help power couples be successful at home just like they are at work. If you're crushing it in the business world but quietly disconnected from your spouse, you're not alone. Check them out at davidandalexis.kiwi.org. They have spent years creating a simple tool set that will help you save your marriage. Don't forget to use code EXECUTIVE1 to save $500 off their 6-week coaching program. davidandalexis.kiwi.org, code EXECUTIVE1. Yeah, 100%. I think there's so much there too. And one of the things that I loved you mentioned is like this fight or flight response, right? When we're in this whole hustler culture, travel culture, we're responding to, the flight or changing the gates or getting our rental car or getting an Uber or getting to the next location. So our body's really living in this fight or flight all the time, which, as you kind of alluded to is so many things are like secondary to that, like our adrenal glands. If our bodies are constantly living as women in fight or flight, it's going to fatigue our adrenals and everything kind of cascades from there. So I love that something as simple as putting our hands together or, breathing in for 4 seconds and breathing out for 4 seconds. It seems so basic. Like a lot of times people are like, oh, I know I breathe in and out all the time. But when you actually stop doing it and close the computer, turn your phone off, and you do it, it's amazing how your body naturally just calms and your shoulders come down and you're more relaxed and you're more clear to do the things you need to get done instead of, keeping 80 tabs open in fight or flight all day. So I love that you brought that up. And it kind of brings me to my next point I want to talk to you about. Like I was one, who used to believe that I had to be busy every single minute of the day, driving to something wherever I was going. But I do think there's a big shift in the future of work and how to thrive in the workplace today, because it's very much, in my opinion, evolving. Hybrid models are evolving, company missions are evolving, and companies are putting their people first and really focusing on that. So I want to get your thoughts on what do you believe leaders really need to do differently to thrive in the future of work today?
Yes, I love this topic because I think there's so much richness in there that it'll continue to evolve, but there's so much that we can even just pick up right now. So I think against that backdrop, I think one piece to kind of highlight that I always like to go into is kind of this recognition that we're in workplaces for the most part that were built for an industrial revolution era where we're making widgets and things, and some of us still make widgets and things, but we really focused on products. And so we have a punch card and a timesheet and all of the things and a conveyor belt and all of the things when we made products. It's only the 1980s, 90s where we had really services at scale, where you have professional services, and sure, there were shops and something smaller, but that's really the rise of these larger service businesses where the value you were providing was service. We're heading towards this knowledge age, or intelligence age is what we're calling it now, where it's going to be a mix of products and services, but the end result of value we're going to create is outcomes. And when I think about that, we're getting to a place where clients, yes, there still will be people selling products, but we might get to a place where people are saying, I don't care how you make it and whether it's a product or a service or AI does this or 5 humans touch it, like I want my experience delivered in this way at this cost. And so when I think about that, if we are a leader who is in kind of a command and control, or there has to be a hierarchy or anything that's kind of, built from some of the past ages that we went through, we're having to go through this kind of unlearning process and say, does that still serve us in the intelligence age, in the business that I do, in this moment of time, in this dot on the map, or not? And that's something that only each of the leaders can answer. There's no one answer for all of that, depending on sector and all kinds of things. But I like to start there because I think it really depends on what you're doing, how you create value in the world, what types of things are expected of you from your customers. But given that, there's unlearning and then learning, right? We have to unlearn some of the ways we let ourselves, and then we have to think about how is technology changing this? How will AI make some of those, differences? Or are there different ways we can lead? That a lot of the latest research is showing that in some industries, there will be, crowdsourced products where it doesn't matter whether we're in the same company. We're all collaborating on one idea and then getting that product to market on a technology platform, for example. That's a very different org structure and a very different way of incentivizing people than what we used in the 1990s, for the knowledge age, for example. So the unlearning and the relearning, or the picking up new learning, is kind of, priority number one. I think the second is thinking about balancing being and doing, or productivity and innovation, whatever labels you want to call it. That's a really big shift to make. And if you're trying to set aside hustle culture from running the show all the time, you might be in the doing. We're going to do all the things. This was me. I'm going to do all the things at work, and I'm going to get everything done. I'm going to close the deal. I'm going to fly to Vegas and help my guys close their deals. And then I'm going to fly home, and I'm going to do everything in the house, and I'm going to get the lunches and it was doing all of the time. And I say that with just, an enormous amount of compassion for myself, because it was exhausting and I didn't even know it or recognize it or acknowledge it. But it was all doing. And so now it's, how do I balance the doing and the being? How do I think about, maybe it's even in micro moments in my day, of building in time to actually not have to be productive, but let my brain go offline in a minute. And ironically, and not ironically, but by design, but what seems ironic, is those are the times when we're the most creative, because it's a different process that's allowed to come forward when we're not in the doing. And if you don't believe me, then I'd ask you to really question whether you haven't had a great idea in the shower, or while you're on a run, or or while you're cooking, some place where you haven't been able to do or produce in the same way. And suddenly, this great, this problem you've been working through, suddenly this great idea comes to you. It's because this process of the doing has stepped back for a moment, and we're allowed to be a little bit. And that's really where the space of being able to thrive as a leader, lets you kind of balance those two things. So those are the main things I would say, is really kind of balancing the productivity and the creativity, the being and the doing, and then being open to kind of unlearn and then relearn the things that we'll need to thrive in the future of work.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I totally echo. I have to just, wow, lots of words here. But I agree. I think when we stop our brain, like sometimes I have the most brilliant ideas with no radio on, driving in my car, looking, well, it's such a beautiful day. And I'm like, I should do it this way. But my brain is just not, where do I have to do next? Where do I have to go? What kind of hustle do I need to get done? And so it's so, so true. I want to talk a little bit about the growth zone. You've worked with so many high-performing executives, many of which are navigating constant pressure and constant change, and you've helped them find their growth zone. So what exactly is the growth zone, and how do you help leaders find that without burning out in the process?
Yes. So I love to talk about this. So within the corporate rehab perspective, it's all about how to rehab your relationship with hustle culture. And that's really where the book's, focuses on. But I thought, as I went and started to do workshops and keynotes and talking to more teams, I felt like, how do I actually give them something to what to do next, right? So maybe for some people, they're changing a role. Some people left that job, took a new one. But for those of us who are saying, okay, I can be in a different place, in a different role, but how do I actually operate at this place on a consistent basis? And that's really where the growth zone was born. And it's my name for the process that I founded, which is essentially, how do you keep your people operating out of comfort, because we don't want everybody just being in this comfort zone, but not pushing so hard that they're then into overdrive. What if we could help them be on that curve that's right in the middle between that comfort zone and the overdrive zone? And that's really where the growth zone is. And so we work with folks to have them take an assessment and look at all of these different dimensions. And it's a lot of the things we talk about in the book, but it's starting with a vision for what they want. What are they trying to do? Sometimes it's someone who's saying, I want to go into a different industry, or I want to get to that next level in my job. So what type of leap are you trying to make? And what does your vision look like for that? Then we get into mindsets and habits. So what are the things you might need to shift about that? Are you still operating the same way you did? I know that was part of my story, is I was operating, I burned out in my job when I was operating still as kind of a new director and having the same type of habits, trying to do something, as a partner. And it's just not sustainable. You have to let certain things go and pick up delegation. But I didn't have a perspective of how to make all of those shifts. So it's those types of mindsets and habits of how to think about your time and your energy, how to actually be practical about how you use your time and your energy from a calendar perspective. And then we get into things like resilience, because if you're going to be hustling and then taking your foot off the gas and hustling again, and stress is the number one underlying source of disease in America at this point in time. And so how do we actually build resilience and think about ways to shed all that cortisol that our bodies are picking up. It sounds like you might be a runner just like me, and I think I naturally chose that I'm going to run because I can just shed all this cortisol. I didn't know why I was doing it, but my body was craving it, but it really gives us a chance to kind of get out all that cortisol that we pick up during the week, and it's a way to kind of reset. So things like that kind of just help us, think about what to do differently. And then we get into expansion. So if you do all of those things, then how can you actually expand and make more impact with the same amount of effort that you're putting forward? So it's kind of working smarter and not harder. And that's really what we focus on. It's pretty exciting to see big companies and individual leaders start to make these shifts so that they can actually get more and see higher ROI.
Yeah, I love it. And it's funny, I think of my day like a battery. I'm like, where am I spending my energy? How am I spending my energy? And if we're in high stress mode all the time, it's amazing how fast that battery is depleted. It's almost like I feel sometimes it'll deplete, half as fast or double as fast because we're just constantly stressed and our body's like, pivoting and trying to keep up with our pace. And so we're just all moving so fast. So I love that you mentioned, I think it's such an important awareness piece of realizing where are you spending your 168 hours in a week? Are they in high stress situations? And if they are, finding an outlet, whether it's running or it's yoga or it's playing with your dog or your kids or whatever your outlet is, it's amazing how fast you can regroup, recoup, and get back on the train when you've had a couple moments of rest. So I want to kind of pivot, being somebody that's always been in driving revenue and strategy and leading. I know everything for me has always been metrics, metrics, metrics. And I know many of our leaders that listen to this podcast, they're managing major teams, they're driving revenue targets. What's your advice for those that are listening on how to lead with authenticity and values without falling behind in their results?
Yes. So one thing I think that's it's usually a myth that people believe is if I make time for the soft stuff of the empathy and listening and communicating, that is going to cost me the hard results. And I have news for you. It's actually the opposite. And that's because we don't live in this world of scarcity where, if I do this thing that feels like it's taking up more time, then I will lose on this other side. Both can be true. Both can kind of coexist. And the studies actually show that when you use other parts of your leadership, your results go even faster. So that's kind of the good news. I'll hit that right up front because I am definitely a metrics person as well. If you want to look at it from a bottom line perspective, right now, employee engagement is super, super low. 62% of employees are disengaged, and that is actually costing us $8.8 trillion globally in lost productivity. So I just want to think about that for a second. Then we're talking about our individual metrics, but when you aggregate, when we're burning everybody out and we're running really hard and we're losing them or they're quiet quitting and just saying, I'm going to mail it in and not actually do any more than you're asking me to, we're leaving $8.8 trillion on the table. So what if you were able to just shift a little bit within the way you lead or the way you incentivize your teams and actually claw some of that back? And the other stat that kind of always blows me away is that we spend $10,000 for every $100,000 of salary on burnout. So just multiply that by all of your different folks that are leaving and thinking about the fact that burnout is averaged between 72 and 82% over the last 10 years. You're leaving a lot of money on the table because you're having those people leave and then you're having to find new people and someone's double hatting and then that person's burning out. So all of that, when you think about leading ourselves differently, there is a business case. I actually have a calculator for this because I've worked with a lot of CFOs that want to see what they can claw back and they're always shocked when I give them the numbers. So there's a business case for doing it. So if you can kind of buy into that from a rational perspective, that you'll actually get more money in your pocket or more of a bottom line, then getting into the how, really comes down to setting a super clear vision for people. Right now, we're swimming in a lot of uncertainty, whether that's markets uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty. People need these micro moments of certainty, because maybe you can't promise everything. Maybe you can't promise that there's not going to be a layoff, or you can't promise that they're going to get a bonus or whatever it might be. But give them micro moments of certainty. And what I mean by that is a clear vision of, here's where we're going, here's what I need you to do within that growth trajectory. Be really clear about their role in that. And then feedback. That's what we're hearing from every generation, is they want more and more feedback. And there's really cool ways to get creative with that, of doing office hours or sending emails that have kind of specific things that you're doing as a blast, as opposed to it being this time suck. But those are the things that I would say really help people feel like they're involved in your vision and you're bringing them along, but that you're also empowering them, because it's their career at the end of the day, and you're trying not to play therapist, you're trying to be a leader to them.
Yeah, I love that. And I can't remember who said this, Jenny, but I think it was Brene Brown, like, clear is kind. And yes. I really do believe that is, as a leader, we all know we have to get stuff done, and being clear with your staff on what those things are, and that they're an important person in that vehicle with you, and they, have a seat in that vehicle and you need their help. I think it's very helpful in building teams, and teams that work well together. I think when they don't have that, it's easier for people to say, okay, it's 5, I'm out of here. But if you're all pulling with the same clarity and the same understanding, people will jump in and help when it's a late night to get stuff done, because they know that it's due. And so I think it's such an important point. I love that you brought that up. Now, I want to get kind of any thoughts or anything that we may have missed that you want to share with our listeners before we close up.
I would just say, for the longest time, I had really looked for somebody else in my business to give me some of these answers. And I thought, if I could just find someone who's, 10 years ahead of me, or two levels up, who has the answer. And I just want to give you kind of the permission and the encouragement that you have the answer. Right now there's something within you that says, maybe I could try it this way, and there is no one right answer, but those answers are already within you. There's no special outside person who's going to come deliver that. You have to kind of do that work to say, let me think about what those things could be. How could I apply them? I hope the book helps. It's always worth picking up to see if that helps be a guide. And then I do private coaching and workshops for teams to kind of go through a lot of these, and I'm always happy to have that conversation, so feel free to reach out. But I'm just cheering you on. I'm confident and hopeful that if all of us do this work, we can all rehab the way that we lead in the future of work.
100%. You're such a breath of fresh air in today's overworked world. And so for anybody that wants to start their corporate rehab, where can they find your book, and how is it best for them to connect with you?
Yeah, definitely follow me on LinkedIn. I try to do as much education and put as many tips out there and inspire as much as I can. So feel free to find me there at Jennie Blumenthal. And then you can always go to the website, which is www.corporate-rehab.com. And I've got all my keynotes and workshops and group coaching there. So feel free to find me either place. And I really look forward to staying connected. I'm always interested to hear how the book lands with folks. And I like to think that I hold up a mirror to the things that they already know within them, but got covered over with timelines and hustle culture. And so I'm proud of you for even listening to this and starting to think about, ways that you could start this work in whatever phase that works for you.
I love it. Her book's fantastic. I know I've highlighted it. I've gone through it, and I've reread some of the areas that I need to do a little bit better on myself. So thank you so much for being here today, Jennie, and sharing your knowledge and wisdom and time with our listeners. And that's the Executive Connect podcast.